everybody. Welcome to A Case of the Jills. It is day before Thanksgiving if you're in the United States. And I have another really amazing guest with me today that I'm excited to introduce to you. Her name is Adelaide, and she is a pretty amazing woman. She's going to share with us a lot of her personal experiences with mental health as an athlete. And what's really exciting is that she's also an author, a very recent author. Actually, not recent because she's been writing this book for a long time, but she just released it. Yeah. It's called Degloved, and I'm going to let Adelaide explain to you more about the book and also what the title means. And I'm also going to make sure that I include the link below. You can find it on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, which is how I got it, and it is a must read. So let's get started. Hi, Adelaide.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. And you are talking to us from where today?
I am in Tucson, Arizona. We just came here to spend some time for the winter. We normally are in Boulder, Colorado, but being here, we can enjoy some warm weather training through the winter.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm jealous. I'm sure lots of people watching this are going to be jealous. So your book is called Degloved. And as I told you when we first started talking, I would want to talk to you even if you didn't write this book and even if you didn't have reason to write this book, but you did. So tell us, first of all, what does it mean, degloved?
So degloved is a medical term for when your skin gets peeled back, kind of as though you were taking off a glove from your hand, except it's the skin. So I was in a crash where a car pulled out in front of me when I was on a training ride, and I was going downhill, didn't have enough time to avoid the car or stop, and I went through the driver's side window and shattered all the glass with my left side of my face. So my face was degloved from about here on my lip all the way back to behind my ear. And so that's the title of the book. And also the other side of it is just the idea that I was peeling back what it was like to go through recovery and give this honest account of what the years afterwards were like for me and those around me.
Right. It's an incredible book. It tells the story in such an incredible way. And as I was saying before, Adelaide wrote this book as though she were an investigative journalist. So she went and interviewed all the people that played a role in the accident, her recovery. And so when you read it, you have to remind yourself that you're not reading a journalist's beautiful account of an entire episode. You're actually reading her going back and trying to make sense of something that was no doubt completely life-changing. So it's really interesting to read that. What is even more interesting is to understand that Adelaide did not come into this accident without some concerns already in her life. And she is a person who has bipolar 2, yes. And she, as an athlete, even before this crash, had to learn a lot about what bipolar meant in her life and how to manage that. And so I would love for you to tell us a little bit, Adelaide, about your sort of history with bipolar, just as you understood what it was and all the way through to even up to the crash.
So I was diagnosed when I was 26. I had symptoms since high school. I grew up as an athlete, and then I got into swimming because my older sister was a swimmer. So I kind of had this background of knowing that athletics were important, and we had a very good swim coach who really pushed us to kind of our mental edge with swimming in high school. But once I started experiencing symptoms, it became harder for me to train consistently. I dropped out of the swim team around then, and I would just get really tired. Doing sports helps because I have a lot of self-confidence in that realm. Like, I really enjoy that feeling when you're consistently training and you come back from a really good workout. I think there's a lot of health benefits to it, right? But but it's also something that tells me that like I'm doing okay. If I can be like training consistently, it's a sign that my brain's in working order too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what kind of symptoms did you start to notice when you were a younger person before you had been diagnosed? Aside from the fatigue, was there anything else that sort of crept up that you would notice even when you weren't training?
So I would eat a lot of carbs. It was like the phase where like where things were, it was the 90s. So it was like everything was higher carb intake, I feel like anyways. And I really liked carbs. But so what was happening, the way it was explained to me by a psychiatrist once I was diagnosed, which was really interesting, was like your brain uses a lot of glucose. And if your brain's in overdrive or it's not functioning, you like need the glucose. You might reach for like the sugar or the carbs. And then unlike somebody without bipolar, like my blood sugar might like drop faster. And so then I put myself in this like detrimental situation where you kind of like your body's like no you now you need more because otherwise you could like a tiger could come get you or something, you know, and you won't be ready. And so I was just constantly riding this wave of like having carbs, having too much sugar, and then like crashing really hard and then using it to come back up to normal and function again. And so in high school I used to binge eat on like zone bars and stuff. Like my mom would buy like bars and chocolate, muffins, and like just anything carb stuff, anything with carbs really. And that continued off and on throughout until I was diagnosed. Whenever I was in really stressful situations, like I was, my brain was more out of whack, and then I would turn to carbs and it would just be this downfall.
And so would you notice performance kind of decreasing when you were, before you got diagnosed? What would make your performance as an athlete kind of go down? Were there any things or?
Between like dropping out of swimming in high school and being diagnosed, I did lots of athletic adventures, but I was not an athlete in the way that I am now. It was not consistent where I understood, like if you look at like people who go out and do races, there's like people that are very serious and compete. And then there's like, as one friend likes it, the completers. And I was like more on the completion. Like I would go out to do something, to say I did like, okay, I'm going to run a marathon, and I would run a marathon and like, I may or may not be trained properly going into that marathon. And like now if I sign up for something, I'm properly trained. But so I didn't really have a sense exactly at that time, because everything, I felt like a lot of that time between 16 and 26 was kind of like fly by the seat of my pants. And when I was on an upswing and hypomanic, I might do something like go run a trail marathon with my sister and then have her leave me at that town and ride like 100 miles with my bike, you know, over the weekend right after the marathon to like get back to town or something. I
Right.
would just use, I would have that energy and I would use it all up because I knew it wasn't going to stay. And so I would take advantage of it, and then I might crash, and then I would just wait for my energy to come back before something else, because that's kind of how I rolled. I didn't know better.
So it was kind of like energy burnout, crash down, energy burnout, crash down. So how long would it take for you after you like had a crash? Like how long would it take? Would it like days or weeks until you could kind of get yourself back in order again?
Yeah, I think it depended. If I was in a lot of that time I was in kind of I set myself up in low stress situations. And so I could normally come out of it within a week or two. I know I had longer episodes. And then the year before I was diagnosed, I went into a master's program. It was a 1-year master's program. So it was fairly stressful. And it also just took up a lot of my time because it was like teaching during the day and then classes at night. And over that year, I gained 30 pounds probably. And I mean, like, I was just living off like pounds of trail mix. It was ridiculous, but I didn't know how to stop that. Some people think that like you just, oh, you have food problems, you just choose a new diet and you stop it. But like if your brain's relying on it, you really like, it's, you can't.
Yeah.
It's not that simple. You kind of have to get everything like stabilized before. And now, like, now I won't do that. And it's not because I suddenly have willpower. It's because like my brain chemicals are stable.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. So in all that time, so let's just be clear, in all that time where you were doing a lot of like figuring out, you were not on any medication at all. You were just, you didn't know what was going on. You just were trying to white knuckle
In
it.
high school, my parents thought that something was wrong. And so they tried to get me to see a psychiatrist or what psychologist. And I didn't want to talk to that person. I think I was a pretty stubborn kid. I think I might have gone into one office and just not said a word. Like I wanted nothing to do with it, but the conversation was more around depression. And to be honest with you, I knew I wasn't depressed. It was like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know that's not it.
Oh yeah.
And at one point in a journal, I actually wrote in college, like scribbled, because I was in the middle of probably an episode. And I found this later, like years later. I said, like, I could have, I don't remember what the wording was, but like I might have bipolar. And I like spelled bipolar wrong. Like, I didn't like, I think I spelled it with a Y or something, but it was like scribbled out of anger. And looking back on it, I'm like, yay, me. I knew what was going on. Subconsciously, I knew something was going on, but it took a long time because the labels that I was hearing kind of thrown around weren't right. And I knew that. Once I got diagnosed, like once I went in and somebody mentioned bipolar and sat down and said, like, bipolar 2 has hypomania. It's not like you're not hallucinating, but you have all this extra energy, and explained hypomania, and then explained atypical depression, which like lethargy, like slight paranoia, um, and like the overeating and just really reactive and sensitive to things. And it wasn't, I guess with atypical depression, you can feel depressed. I mean, it's kind of depressing being atypically depressed. So you do get like, I do get traditionally depressed, but I'm more apt to like come out of it if something good happens. So when somebody explained to me that it wasn't a standard, like, I guess what we hear when we think of depression, where somebody's just like very morose and hard to get cheered up again. Then it was like, oh, like I met all the criteria, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But nobody had that was not the conversation up until I was 26, partially because I didn't go in for those conversations. I pretty much avoided them. I talk about how when I was like 22 or something, I went into the military psychologist, but he was an asshole to me and we didn't make it very far. So
Yeah.
it just took time.
Yeah. That's
Which
an important point. Yeah. Cause it's like, if you don't have the right person to ask the right questions, right? Like it's not gonna.
yeah.
So now you're diagnosed, and between your diagnosis and the crash, that was that sort of a period of learning, or by that point were you like, okay, I think I'm getting this dialed? What was that journey like?
It was learning, but it was also like, it was very interesting because I had a lot of these coping skills from earlier on. Like I developed coping skills, good and bad. Um, but like sports was always there. I knew exercise was important. I always tried to exercise when I was in the Coast Guard and we were in the Mediterranean, and we were like, we were under Navy command and you had to go out with other people. You couldn't just go out by yourself in a foreign country. And so you always had to find a buddy. So I was like always walking around the boat trying to find a buddy to go for a run with me. And like most of the crew laughed at me, but I think inherently I knew it was an important coping mechanism. And that, so I think I had a lot of coping mechanisms that were there before I was diagnosed. But once I was diagnosed, I was like, oh, I understand them. Like I had never drank a lot of alcohol, but then once I understood that alcohol might affect my brain a little bit differently and I have to be careful, then I like consciously made decisions around alcohol and when I decide to drink or when I don't. And it's a little less haphazard, And same thing with sleep and with taking on stressful roles and getting exercise and my nutrition and my relationships. Like all these things became things that I kind of worked on before, but I didn't know what the reasoning was. And now I had like a concrete answer of like, this is why it helps. This is what I have to do. And it made it easier. And but it was still a very, it was a practice to be worked on. It still is to this day, honestly. I think I'm a lot further along than I was several years ago, but it's just always like a practice.
Always a learning practice for sure. I can
Mm-hmm.
see that. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the details of some of the things that you learned in that time? Maybe we can start with something kind of easy like nutrition. In your book, you mentioned in a couple of places that sugar is a problem. Tell us more about that if you don't mind.
I feel like sugar is just like a lot of things that are a problem for me are a problem for like, I feel like a lot of people. It's like bipolar is like, it's like living a little further off the spectrum of like maybe normal, but a lot of what I describe, friends will be like, oh, I'm like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but behind closed doors, you might not be quite as bad as me when I like have problems. But in general, like we all react to sugar. And I guess, so now I try and like bake things myself, so that I'm aware of how much sugar I'm putting in. I try and limit my sugar intake towards, this is probably actually not a great habit because you shouldn't necessarily have it at the end of the day before you go to bed, but I try and like eat healthy all day and like limit my desserts to like nighttime so that it kind of like forces it into a small window. So I'm not just like eating dessert all day. And I don't totally follow that. Sometimes there's dessert to be had. Sometimes there's apple pie for breakfast, but like that's not a normal thing. I normally try and keep things healthy. We eat, so I met my husband, Kenneth, when like just a few months after I was diagnosed, and he started making the salad, and we've eaten the salad for like, we've known each other for like 8 years now. And we eat this salad probably 80% of the nights or more that we're together or not together. We just eat the salad, and it's every night. And we know that it's like lettuce, apple, mango, nuts, meat, avocado, and maybe I'm forgetting something else. And the
Sounds
meat varies.
delicious.
The meat varies, and bell pepper. And like some ingredients have slightly changed over the years, but like it's the same salad. But the nice thing is like I came to Tucson the other day, and he was a day behind me, and I got here first. And after a long day of driving, I stopped at the grocery store and I went in and I got salad ingredients. It was easy. I knew what to do. And it took away that like decision making, which after a long drive, you're fatigued. It's really easy to not know what to do. And I'm not a good cook. And that can be like an overwhelming thing. And I have anxiety, or used to have a lot of anxiety around food choices because I wasn't making good ones. And I was always afraid that whatever choice I made was going to cause like, was just going to send me down the wrong path. And so it's really nice that I have like these meals that we deviate, but I rely on this, like I have this baseline of like eating pretty much the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then when I deviate, because there's a holiday or because we have friends over or this or that, I know that if I go back to baseline, and I know if I have more protein, and I know what will kind of help like level me out if I'm feeling off. And it gives me a little bit more confidence to deviate over the years. But that was a big thing because I didn't know how to do nutrition to take care of myself.
So for you, is it related to blood sugar? So would you say that you eat things that to sort of keep your blood sugar stable? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. And it's not like a science thing. It's more just like I've gotten confident that certain meals work and that I can be good with certain meals,
Right.
if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm trying to incorporate more protein. Actually, after my crash, protein's so important for your body to recover that they were like, you can't leave the hospital unless we know you're going to have enough protein. And that was like pretty eye-opening to me, to just how important it was. And I have since become probably a little bit better about making sure my meals have protein. Just if I go for like too many meals with too many carbs, it's just back to the old habits that that I had when I didn't know what was wrong with my brain, and it can send me down the wrong direction, I guess.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I do have sugar when I train. Like I went out for a bike ride today and I had sugar. Like I don't want people to think that I never have sugar or anything. It's just I try and just choose when I have it a little bit. I try to just be conscious. Like I'm aware of what I'm taking in.
What is your relationship with trying to understand how much training is going to help versus how much is going to hurt you at that time? Let's say specifically around bipolar, because we're going to talk about PTSD too, but for the purposes of bipolar, what is sort of your relationship to understanding your edges or your limits with that stuff?
As far as training, so the cool thing is if I'm going to go do a 20-minute power test on my bike or something where I need like a lot of extra energy or I want to perform really well, like I try not to schedule it on a certain day. I try and like wait till I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, today's the day. Like I'm feeling that extra, like I try and wait till I'm a little bit hypomanic, because there's certain things where if you're feeling really good, like you might as well, you have the energy, you might as well use it use it in that realm.
Yeah,
So like for a while Kenneth coached me, which was easy in the sense that he was living with me, so he could we could talk about those sort of changes. I have had coaches, which is good because it keeps you like consistent, so you're not just like going off the highs and then dropping off on the lows. But now I've coached myself on and off too, and I just try and like take advantage of where my energy levels are. So like today on the bike, I went out and I haven't been riding as much. And so I'm just getting back into it. And so I just like decided while I was riding, I was going to do 10 by 1 minute efforts, just like not just to like get my legs moving again. And so I'm able to, even knowing that I like was able to be on a ride and choose a structured workout was, that is a sign of motivation, but it's also like a sign that like I'm doing well. And then when I'm not doing well, I rely now, not so much during pandemic, but I rely on friends. So for me, it's a big social thing where if I know that I'm not doing well and I won't get out, I will make sure I contact a friend and kind of rely on a friend to motivate me or a friend to get me out. And then it's the social time or Kenneth, or I'll just I try and make plans ahead of time, knowing that I might not have the motivation, but if I just know I have to be there and be somewhere at a certain time, it helps. So I guess I kind of use like my ups and downs to try and leverage them, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. And so in your book, you mentioned certain times where you had understood that if you pushed too hard, if you did too much, it was going to set you up actually for a worse sort of mental health outcome. And sort of how did you come to understand that, and what would be the fallout, say, from pushing too hard or doing too much?
I had a nutritionist for a long time, and she kind of became my life coach and just a mentor in general. And I think she was like, she knew me. She was the one who actually helped get me to the psychiatrist who diagnosed me with bipolar. So she saw me. She's one of the few people that I still know in my life who kind of has seen me before, after, and the whole mix of it. And I just remember her telling me, like, are you sure you want to be doing like Ironmans and half Ironmans? And like, are they really good for you? Do you really feel like, do you notice that you dip after you do those events, that you might have a few weeks where you're not doing as well? It was interesting her telling me that, because I don't know if I had that self-awareness. But somebody else pointing out that maybe those things aren't great. And now they're fine because I know how to like go into it with a consistent training load and be prepared. But I mean, my first Ironman I did on a Surly touring bike, and it was like a little bit fly by the seat of my pants. Like I did some big rides, but I didn't know what I was doing. Like I wasn't trained. And so now if I'm going to do something, I try and make sure my training load going into an event is adequate, that it's not just this big jump in activity. Because if you go from doing like a little bit, and then all of a sudden you have this massive day, it just depletes your body and your body's not ready for it. So there again, it's like it's that way for everybody. It's just with bipolar, I'm more apt to like sink a little bit lower than the other person. I've just learned over trial and error of just doing really big days that I wasn't ready for and then paying the price a little bit later, just being a little extra tired. I'd rather consistently train because it helps keep my brain stable than have really big days and then not be able to recover and come back. Especially during the pandemic, that's been a big thing for me. I didn't want to do anything during the pandemic, and I didn't really want my athletes who I coached to do anything so crazy that they would like miss out on a chunk of training to recover, because I felt like the consistency was so important for so many of us for mental health that I was like, okay, well, if you go do that crazy day event, like I had an athlete who wanted to do Everesting, going up a climb on a bike primarily, although people do it like running up ski slopes and such, where you try and hit the elevation of Everest in a day by going up the same climb over and over again. So I had an athlete who was going to Everest, and she did great. But the conversation was like, after you do that, it's a big day. It's like, I don't know, it might have taken, I forget how long it took her. It was months ago, but it's well over 10 hours, you know? And I was like, you just have to be prepared that the next 2 weeks you're going to be in like recovery mode and you're going to be really low volume. If you're using exercise as a coping mechanism for just life right now, you don't want to lose that. And yeah, she was fine with it. It was good, but I just wanted to like have that conversation set up ahead of time.
Yeah, that is so important. And it's so, first of all, I want to put that on a t-shirt and like have everyone wear it, you know, but it's so insightful.
And if you go do a race under normal circumstances and you blow yourself out of the water or whatnot, and then you come back and you like spend the next 2 weeks enjoying time with family and friends, like then you're adapting to a different coping mechanism and you're focusing on a different area of life. And I think that's wonderful to like, you don't always have to be in this consistent like 5K a day for life for running or whatever, you know, you can have ups and downs in training. But so often when one thing dips down, when you go into winter off season, you choose to spend more time with family and friends or do an art project or do something else. But right now we just, you know, we don't have as many of those other options available to us. And so I see some people are using exercise as though it's the only thing out there to cope. And you just have to make sure that there's other stuff that you can turn to if you do bigger events, I guess. It's my philosophy.
It's so wise. I love that. Thank you for saying that. It's such good advice we all need to listen to. Do you mind if we start talking about the accident?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So you went out for a training ride and on your triathlon bike.
Yeah.
And your boyfriend at the time, now husband, was not with you. He was on a separate ride with other people.
Correct.
And the plan was for you to meet up after, but you never made it. Right. I love how I'm telling her the story back to her and she's smiling, right? Is this not like...
I've been through the story enough. I'm okay with it.
So post accident, you were in the hospital for how long?
11 days. I was in intensive care the whole time. They wanted to transfer me to the regular hospital, and I was like, no, I want to go home. Which in hindsight may not have been the best choice, but I really felt like I needed to be home. So.
Yeah. Could you summarize for us the surgeries, ramifications?
So they got me to the hospital and put me in a sedated coma for the first 5 days. The first surgery was probably 7 to 8 hours long, and it was that day. But I wasn't awake for it. I wasn't making any of the decisions. And that first day, man, there's so many things that I learned that I think when I also started out to write a book, I just was intrigued by how much I had to learn after the fact about my crash. And I thought it was really interesting these little details. Like the first day, they did not fix the bones in my face. They only sewed up my skin. And I was like, what? Because I didn't learn that till I woke up. But they just picked glass from my face and they stitched up my face, which was about 700 stitches. And I'm sure they did other stuff, but that was like the main goal of the first surgery. And then the second surgery was Tuesday while I was still in a sedated coma. And during that period of time, because my jaw had been broken, they decided, and they being, there was an oral surgeon, a trauma surgeon, and a facial surgeon, and then anyone else. But those were like the three main guys. And so they decided, with some debate, that I should have a stomach tube because they weren't sure that I would be able to get adequate nutrition through my mouth because I couldn't chew. So they did a stomach tube on the second surgery. At some point, I also had a trach. So I was on a ventilator. I don't know if that was first or second surgery. So I had a hole cut in my throat. And then they went back in. Oh, I thought this was gross at the time. I still do. Through my eye socket and fixed all the bones in my face, which I think is super weird, in that second surgery. And I was like, so I was first 5 days, and then they let me wake up. I had another surgery a little over a year later where I had, when the skin closed up on my neck and on my stomach, it left like a skin flap. It was kind of gross. And so they went back in and fixed that. And then they minimized my scar, and my lip was pulled up a bit because, just because of the way it was ripped back. And so the surgeon just like dropped my lip a little bit because I didn't like that. And I could have more surgeries, but I don't want to.
You actually kind of from like sternocleidomastoid down didn't have any like real anything wrong, right?
Right. I feel like I'm the only one who can say it out loud, but I feel like I kind of won the lottery in terms of like I won't have any problems with movement later on in life as a result of the crash. I may have it from doing too much exercise or something else later, but like I didn't break, an arm or hip, or there's a lot of things that you can break that can really mess up your ability to continue doing exercise and sports and make it difficult. And in the grand scheme of us sitting here 6 years later, it's cosmetic now with the exception of my teeth, which will need more work at some point. But that's pretty good outcome considering how bad it was.
Yeah. And so it's very interesting then that you were physically capable of, let's say, physically now, capable of going back to ride fairly, and I mean, relatively speaking, like kind of quickly afterwards, right? So from the crash to the first time you kind of got on a bike, it was not long, if I remember correctly from the book. How long was it?
I want to say it was like, I forget because I haven't written it. I don't remember if I put it in the book, but it was like somewhere in the range of like 5 weeks. Probably less than, honestly. The first ride, I still had my stomach tube in, and I rode like a mile to my friend was a strength coach, and she had a women's strength class. And I was like the little kid who sits there and like stretches while everyone else is actually doing weights, but I couldn't really do anything. So it was just, it was like dropping me off at preschool so I could socialize with people. And Kenneth did drop me off because I wasn't going to ride by myself. And I did tear some muscles. And so I wasn't able, my like ability to look over my shoulder and protect myself in traffic was not adequate to ride by myself. But at that point I was also like, I was actually writing about this for an interview recently. I was kind of high on life. Like when you have a near-death experience, like everything, all the minutia of daily life and all the to-do things and everything drops off to just like, I'm alive and this is awesome. And it's awesome that there's music on the radio. And it's awesome that I can go outside and see the mountains. it's awesome that I have a dog and that I can talk to this person and that they're here. And I remember sitting in appointments, outpatient appointments afterwards, and my mom being like, they're taking so long. They should be. And I was just like, whatever. Let them take their time. I got all day. Like, because the rush of life just kind of was like not there. And so initially getting back on the bike was just like, it was easier than it was later, I think. You know, I mean, it's difficult in the sense that I was like, oh, like this is really hard to ride because I lost 12 pounds in the hospital. And man, wouldn't it be great if I were still in shape like I was just a few weeks ago. But the joy of being able to still ride was so important in those first few weeks that in some ways it was way easier than later when some of the hard stuff came up.
Yeah. So paradoxically, you're physically capable of doing this thing that eventually your mind decides it doesn't know how it feels about.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So, of course, it's not going to be a shock for people to know that your crash brought about a pretty strong diagnosis of PTSD, even though it took you a while to sort of recognize symptoms in yourself and sort of accept that. And I totally, I would love to hear more about that experience, but also now, so now you've got a sort of baseline mental health concern with bipolar coupled with PTSD, a body that can ride bikes, a brain that's not sure. Tell us about what that kind of experience was like.
If we're being to be honest and not put, it's easy 6 years later to be like, well, it was learned a lot, but it was awful because I put a lot on my, at this point, fiance, because he had proposed in the hospital. I put a lot on Kenneth because he was the person that was in the house with me all the time, you know, and I trusted him. And my family, love them to pieces, but they are not, my family's not really great with emotions. I'm like the most emotional out of my family. And my family is more like what happens behind closed doors is our business. And so, well, I had their support. I don't know that I had like quite the same level as Kenneth because he was there and he was willing to be open and we were kind of on the same emotional playing field, if you will. And so he took a lot of like my anger, and I was angry about a lot of things. I was angry that I couldn't go train the way I used to. And living in Boulder, God help the injured people in Boulder. You go outside and you just see everyone go outside and train. Like on a good day, it just feels like the whole world is going out to do the best bike ride or the best run, and you are just missing out. Like Boulder, it's a horrible place for injured people. And I totally felt that. We lived near the edge of town where people would go ride and leave town for their bike rides, and I just felt like I was missing out. And on top of that, this was a weird one, but like my hair had been chopped because they had to get to the injuries right here, and so they just like chopped a chunk of my hair. And you can tell probably I don't take great care of my hair. Like I don't do my hair, I just let it dry. And I don't even have a blow dryer here, so like this is like as good as it gets. It air dries. So in some ways I could care less about my hair, but I'm one of those people that has to have like my clothes have to match and things have to feel balanced. I think there's like some sort of energy where if like my underwear and my bra don't match, it can like, it messes me up for the day and no one else will see it. Nobody else
I
will know.
believe in that. I do. Symmetry, something about, yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So it's not like somebody brought up vanity with me the other day. I was like, I don't know if it's vanity, but it is like some sort of symmetry or like sense of, I don't know that I have the best word for it yet, but like my hair was chopped off and that was a big problem for me. Like I really messed with me, things like that. Or just a little, it was just, it felt unfair, right? It felt like I was this victim. And a lot of people did treat me like a victim early on, but then when we started to get into the legal case, people didn't as much. You know, the legal case doesn't really care. Legal system doesn't always care that you're the victim, and it can just feel really harsh. So I guess all that to say is like, it was a very rough year afterwards, with very good moments. Like, the cool thing is that I saw the community really rally around me, and I saw these friendships that I thought, I'm an emotional person. I put a lot into my friendships, and I didn't always believe that like people loved me back the same way. Cause I like had this immense sense of like, oh, this is my run buddy. And it's, you know, I love her and this is great. And she's so important to me. But after the crash, I started to see some of those relationships like be validated. Like, people actually came out because they realized they almost lost me. And so they made it known that I was important to them too. And so it taught me that I could rely on people and trust people a little bit more than I had been. And so I became more apt to tell people about my bipolar, because I just trusted that they wouldn't hate me because of it. And I just started to have these deeper conversations with people. And so I think it changed, like, you know, for as much bad as there was, and it was at that time very awful, but there were a lot of good moments in all of that that make it so that 6 years later, I guess I can be like, well, it was a hard time, but we made it through fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is so, it's really amazing to hear you say that, that it actually, the accident opened you up to the possibility of trusting other people with the knowledge of who you really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like a process over several months to a year where I just started to realize that people were coming out of the woodwork to support me for this physical injury. And I was like, but they were saying things that I needed to hear when I had a bipolar episode. Like, I talk about the letters that I would get, and people don't go like, oh, I hope your face heals really well when they write a letter. They're like, you're a fighter. And you're like, oh, wow, I could have used that 2 years ago when I was like crying on the floor eating trail mix just because my brain chemistry was off. Like, I could have used that then. I could have heard that. I could have heard that then. That would have helped.
Interesting. Yeah. And you said in the book how you have had several occasions where you've taken out all those letters and read them over again, which I think is really so beautiful too, because lots of times we all have like that keepsake box that never gets opened again once we close it. But
Yeah.
I bet everyone who wrote you letters would be happy to know that you have read them not once, not twice, but several times, and that they still mean the same now as they did back then, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. We kept a lot of stuff from the crash, and it's like an interesting, even the book itself. It's kind of cool to be able to go back and like read some things that I had been thinking the story would not have been told if I'd started telling this story now. It wouldn't be the same book.
And so, in terms of the PTSD, where were you starting to see that this was not bipolar, this was something else, sort of like toward the beginning when you got diagnosed?
I didn't really acknowledge it until I had a second crash here in Tucson. Actually, we were here for a training camp, and I crashed and I broke my elbow, and I did fine. I rode my way to the gas station. I waited for like an hour and a half for Kenneth, cracked some jokes. I got increasingly angry because my elbow was really hurting, but I was around other people, so I was putting on a good face. I just naturally, I knew like, oh, I'm around other people, like this hurts, but we'll deal with it. And it was very like, it was very much a like, okay, this isn't a good situation, but we're going to deal with it. And it was like getting handled. And that was all you could do at the time. So it wasn't, I was just like, we've just got this under control. Next thing we'll do is we'll get it looked at by a doctor. And it was very, like mathematical, if you will, of thinking of like how we are going to deal with this. And then we went to the hospital, and I was like, my elbow is broken. And I think I called my mom, and for the first time that evening I cried. And then we got like Dairy Queen, and then in the days and weeks after, I got really angry. I got angry at how the situation had transpired, which I think things could have been done better. But it was like an irrational anger, and it was coming out at Kenneth again, which wasn't fair to him because he wasn't part of any of those decisions, and he really had nothing to do. All he did was pick me up and help me. So it was the wrong person to be angry at. And we went to see the psychiatrist again because I was angry and depressed for weeks. And so we went back to kind of figure out what was wrong with my bipolar. He was like, well, you're at it. You should see a trauma therapist. And she explained to me that that's like classic dissociating from your body, and that basically when I crashed, the second crash, even though I only broke my elbow, I really only had a memory of the first crash. That was my only other crash on a bike besides like accidentally tipping over when I was learning how to put on cleats or yeah, like, I mean, I'd never been, those were my two crashes. And so second crash, I just went back to the memory of the first one. And the first one was like, you almost died. And so what my body did was like, you were going to die, and basically dissociated from what was going on. And that's what made me so able to just be like, well, next we're going to do this and next we're going to do that. Cause I just wasn't really in my body and present at that time. So understanding that, it's different, because I went in that spring with the idea that my bipolar was bad, and it was probably the PTSD.
Right. Does it feel like both play a really strong role in your life as a person, as an athlete, or do you feel like it's kind of like one pops up, the other one goes down? Do they work together? What is your sort of experience of dealing with both now at this point?
At this point, I feel like PTSD is pretty under control. And I say that because I've been through trauma therapy. So I went through Brainspotting, which I didn't initially think worked. But I think like 6 months later, I was like, actually, I don't feel quite as triggered. I think it did kind of work. I think I will always have probably some PTSD. I say that I was riding to teach because I substitute teach. And so last year in the spring, I was riding to school, and I was through downtown Boulder, and some guy cut me off very closely. And I just threw my bike into the middle of the street and started kicking his car and screaming in his window. I was so angry that he had put my life in jeopardy. Like, that's not rational. I also feel like he totally deserved it. Like, I don't feel bad about my PTSD, like, because it only comes out in situations. It's not like I'm riding down the road and some car like nicely gives me 3 feet and I like overreact. It's like, if I'm going to overreact, it's at the person who deserves it a little bit. They have, but I understand initially there were a lot of instances where somebody might come close to me and I would have like that chill sensation, or my body, I would tense up and I would become, now I can be next to cars. They can be a little bit unpredictable. And as long as like everything's kind of going along, like it's going to be okay. It's only the really egregious drivers who really like get me antsy, and rightfully so, because I think, I guess Brainspotting, the therapist said, like, we can take away that feeling that you're super alert when you're on a quiet road by yourself and there's no cars. If you feel alert, then that's irrational, that's PTSD. But like, if you're riding on the road with cars, they are dangerous, and you can't like fully take away that sense of alertness and that sense of anxiety, I guess.
That,
And
like,
so
part, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, it's rational. And so, yeah, I'm more cautious, like during the elections in America, good old election season, those last few weeks, months, whatever. Like the week of elections, I was just like, I feel anxious already. Like, there's already so much to feel anxious about. I was like, I'm not going to put myself on the road where I could feel more anxious. Like, I know that my body probably gets a little bit more alert. I'm probably stressing my system just a little bit more by riding, especially certain roads or certain routes. Or like coming to Tucson. I haven't ridden in Tucson since last year. Today was my first ride. I just rode on the bike path where there aren't cars because I just have to get used to Tucson traffic again. It's different than Boulder traffic. And so it was like day one, let's just get on the bike. And then, you know, in a few days, I'll be riding the roads and I'll be more comfortable. But I watch that anxiety. And that's where PTSD, that's where I kind of manage PTSD. And when I manage that better, my bipolar is better because I'm not stressing my system. Whereas when I was trying to force myself to ride and ignoring the PTSD, it was putting like this additional stress on my body. And it was just making bipolar worse, I think.
Brain spotting is a technique that trauma therapists use to help people cope with PTSD. Do you feel like it's something, would you recommend it for other people? Do you feel like it's something that if someone were suffering from PTSD, it's something for them to look into? You had a good experience with it, obviously.
Yeah, I did. I feel like I challenged the therapist a lot. I was like, does this work? Like, because what happens is you don't necessarily, it's not a straight upward line, first of all. It's kind of like you could walk out of a session and feel worse than you did. So there was a lot of days when I was going through brain spotting where I would ride inside on the trainer because it was just, it's like opening a scab or something. You kind of like some days you may be healing, but some days it's like ripping back a scab. It can feel like a little bit of a roller coaster of healing. And it doesn't, like I said, it took me kind of months. Like I think I did several sessions and I stopped, but it wasn't like a definitive you're cured. It was just kind of like I was done doing it. I was just like done paying the money for therapy. But then months later, I was like, oh, wow, I'm not as triggered as I used to be. So it's just, I guess that's kind of the way it is with therapy in general. Like you kind of have to trust the system a little bit, which is not my nature. And so I was definitely like constantly asking for tell me a little bit more about how this works.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you say that because that's honest. It's like, I'm not sure how much I'm naturally inclined to trust this. I get the impression that there's no end in sight for training. There's no like, I'm retired, I'm quitting, I'm done. That's not happening.
It's always going to be a part of me, I guess. It depends. I don't know that I'll go back to doing pro triathlon, but I will do something. There will have to be something. But for right now, it's interesting because there's not a whole lot, and I'm too nervous to like pick a race or pick anything because of the pandemic. So I'm just kind of waiting it out. But it's just part of our lifestyle. It's definitely part of my husband's lifestyle. It's part of our social circle. So there's a lot of aspects to it. Whether I need it for the sport itself, I still love commuting. I view the bike as I just view the bike as a really nice way to slow down. I think we travel too fast in this world. So there's a lot of things that I appreciate about cycling that are beyond like the sport of cycling or triathlon. Like even if I were to give it up racing, I don't think I would give up the joy of riding. So
That's great. That's great. So you'll find, even if you choose to give up like formal training, you'll still find a way to do this thing that you love, which is incredible. And I know it's like, sometimes I really think that the word like brave is overused. It really, really is. It's like everyone's brave. Like you put a bikini on, you're brave these days. It's like everything's brave. But you know what, girl, I have to tell you, I can't, I don't know. I've never been in your position, but I don't know that I could get on that bike again. So to me, that's brave. It really is.
I've told other people who have been in crashes that you don't like when they are still in their first days of recovery, you don't have to decide if you're going to ride again. Like it's not, I think people want to be like, well, will I ever ride? And it's like, you don't have to, you're recovering from an injury right now. You don't have to decide. And when you decide, like you'll find your happy place. But I know a lot of people who even initially didn't think they would ride again who go back to it. I think you rise to the occasion. I don't know if it's bravery as much as just choosing that it's a really fun thing to do and we're alive and there's so much that could hurt us. And at some point you have to just take risks to enjoy life a little bit. That's kind of what it comes down to.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I can't end this conversation without asking you a little about Maybelline. Can you please tell us about Maybelline? First of all, the name is fantastic. Tell me where the name came from, and tell us a little bit about who she is, please.
Maybelline is our hound dog. I used to say to my mom, like, I don't think I want a dog. I think I need a dog. So we got her right before the crash. She was a puppy. She came to the hospital to see me because that was like a special request from the ICU, which like ICU nurses were like picking straws to see who would get to go outside with me to see my puppy dog, because that was not in their normal repertoire of like afternoon activities as ICU nurses. So she's a 45-pound hound mix. We think she's a Schiller hound. She's pretty adorable, and she travels with us just about everywhere because she's kind of a bit of she's a support animal. Like I said, I feel like I needed her more than wanted her.
If people are looking for you're doing coaching services, yes? Do you still coach people?
Yes. I don't coach a lot. I don't advertise it much, but if somebody, especially after listening to this, feels like we would be a good match, I think I'm a match for a certain type of athlete, and some athletes I'm not. And so I just don't advertise. But yes, my husband and I coach our athletes and cyclists. And our coaching website is Be the Beast Coaching. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to include all of the information
Okay.
in the description box so people can connect with you. Yeah, I truly think even after listening, to our conversation, there's probably going to be a few athletes that might have some questions for you and might want to reach out. So
absolutely. This book, the book about my crash was meant to be a conversation starter about, all the things we talked about here today, not just the crash, but just there's a lot of different things going on in that book. And it was just meant to open up the doors so that people could talk about it and feel less alone. And part of feeling less alone is knowing you have somebody you can reach out to. And I'm happy to be that person for anyone.
I hope it does begin much lengthier and more detailed conversations in the community and beyond about things like PTSD, things like bipolar, mental health in general, and how we can all sort of provide community for each other who are working through a lot of this stuff. I hope everyone watching this, that you realize that you're not alone if you struggle with some of these things. You have a resource here, but also I'm going to include below a bunch of links for more information about bipolar and PTSD specifically. Thank you so much for doing this today, and thank you for talking to all of us. And this was just an incredible conversation. I can't recommend the book enough. Everyone, please go check it out. Okay, so everybody, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Adelaide, don't go anywhere.